Obsidian here, and today I'm going to bring you a layering guide for the First Lite system, especially if you want to utilize their particular products in their line of clothing in Western New York or the East Coast, where you're actually going to hunt deer for the whitetail hunter, just to give you kind of like just a base understanding and just a personal user experience and what pieces I like from their lines and what I use them for and how I utilize them, while giving you a layering guide and what to think about for this coming up fall or spring or whatever your outdoor enthusiasts or hunting seasons, whichever ones you partake in. So one of the first things I'm going to kind of go over is, first off, the camouflage pattern. I know you guys have heard me between the podcast and numerous other another video where we went over the Woodbury jacket, and I talked about a little bit about the fusion camo that First Lite has, and they actually have two main camos, the camouflage patterns that they use. It's called the First Lite Fusion, which is everything that you see here, and Cipher. Fusion has a little bit more of like a green kind of coloration pattern that actually comes in with that within the color palette. So it's really good for trees, not really so much like a field or like more open environment, or even in some cases like a wetland kind of environment. You can still use the First Lite Fusion for that, depending on the environment that you're in, while the Cipher is a little more of a grassy sage kind of color palette. I personally use the First Lite Fusion pattern. I just found that where I hunt, during the what seasons I hunt, the First Lite Fusion pattern seems to blend in the best within those environments. One things I will say about First Lite and their, at least both those camouflage patterns, they're really effective in breaking out the outline of your shape, that human shape. Pretty much just about every encounter I've had with either turkey or deer, and we're going to talk about deer really quick, majority, like for the most part of this. So in terms of my encounters with deer, they don't immediately recognize you as being a human or that human shape. They just know that you're not quite, like if you get busted and I get seen, it's more so like, I don't know what that is, but it just doesn't give me the warm fuzzies, so I'm gonna run. But they don't blow, they don't just bail out, well, if I bail out, but they don't blow out and just like full on take off. It's just enough where it's off-putting. They know you're not exactly what you're like, you should be there, but it's not giving that immediate danger zone where it's like, oh, that's a human, let me run. At least from what I've seen, versus like the deer, I've never really heard a whitetail actually blow me out when they basically bust me. So it really does, and that's really what the plotchy kind of pixelated, kind of broken up patterns designed to do, is to kind of just mesh and blur that human outline. For turkeys, I've used this actually wore this a year ago for last spring, hunting turks, and I had 4 hens come within 15 yards of me, and I was perfectly blended in within my surroundings where they were looking. Looked at me, couldn't pick me out. They just kind of just were like, just chilled for a hot second after I called them in, and just walked off, and that was it. And turkeys, compared to deer, have a little bit sharper eyesight, because they can see color, like more variety of colors, stuff like that. So very effective camouflage pattern. If you don't know anything about First Lite, price point wise and the caliber or the tiers of hunting technical clothing, it's the same caliber and price point and tier as Sitka, QE, you name that. So now I'm going to break down just a little bit. I know by the time that this video comes out, it'll be May, and y'all will be already going out hunting your turks. But just to kind of give some thought, maybe for next year for hunting turkeys, or even going into this coming bow season, especially early season. Well, this bow season or hunting season for whitetails here within the environment of Western New York. From where I've hunted. So I'm going to start off early season bow. Typically, like this past fall, temperatures kind of never really dipped to that 50-degree mark for like the first 2-3 weeks of October. They stayed practically stayed really hot, fluctuating between 80 for like about the high to low to mid 80s for the high, dropping down to maybe the mid to low 60s at night for the low. So for that, I went with typically using their lighter weight, the 150 ultralight or Aero Wool, which is what you see over here on this side of the table. Those lines of products where it's just super breathable. Wasn't going to completely just make me just drenched in sweat walking to the stand, and I was able to stay comfortable and manage just enough where it was all long sleeve. I didn't wear any short sleeve kind of things, so it was long sleeve, so I had just enough warmth to be able to sit in the stand or sit on the hills that I would glass and stay warm, while also not overheating, moving from the stand back home or from spot to spot. Now, one of the cool things I'm gonna hold up a couple things. So this is like their Lolano base tee, old Aero Wool. It's a crew cut, long sleeve, in fusion. Basically, this is my go-to early season base layer shirt. So regardless of whatever else I put on top, this is the base layer shirt I'm gonna wear underneath that. At least this is what I did this past year. Really breathable, keeps you cool, doesn't allow you to overheat, but yet keeps you warm all at the same time when you actually become stationary and retains that heat. And that's kind of what the Aero Wool kind of line is actually like kind of meant to do. It's allows more breathability, especially for like the hotter kind of temps that you're gonna face, where that way you're not gonna overheat, over sweat, and just become stanky. That kind of thing. So this is my go-to base layer. Now, from their 2019, actually, well, this past year, not 18 line launch, they basically took that and basically made the Wick hoodie. It's the same weight class, so 150 weight class, but they basically just took that shirt, maybe added a little more durability to the exterior within the material blend, but they added a hood. And this is the piece I'm going to wear this spring to hunt Turks, and a lot of that early season bow, just because I liked having a hood, so that way I don't have to wear like a baklava or anything else over my face really, or if I do wear like a neck eater over my face, the hood isn't bulky and it's not like an extra piece I have to wear take off. I always have it attached to me. And the same kind of thing, you can even wear this as a base layer as well. It's thin enough. And I've used this on a couple scouting trips already, and it's amazing just the difference even just having this hood available to you will make when you just start to feel like a little cold. You just put that hood up and it just retains that heat just a little bit more, and just a nice feature to have when you're just trying to hover in that middle and not trying to overheat yourself. So this is the Wick hoodie in fusion. Now, one of the cool things about First Lite, and I've noticed this, if you were to take, let's say, the Chama hoodie that they have, which is a little heavier weight than the Wick, but if you see the color patterns, it's the same, it's fusion, but if you look at the color patterns on them, the Chama is a little bit more on that brighter side, while this one's a little bit more on the darker side. And I haven't really talked to anybody from First Lite about this. This is just my little theory, and it makes sense. I think they're purposely kind of making the more base layer, lighter weight stuff a little bit more on the darker side, because early season bow, at least around here in Western New York, it's still brushy, still thick. All the trees have their leaves, and ultimately there's more of those dark colors within the palette versus once we get into about like the mid to end of October, early November, when the leaves start to fall, and then it kind of opens up and a little bit more of those lighter browns kind of come into the color palette, which is where the Chama, Woodbury, Halstead, and all this stuff that you see closer this way starts to fit in. It's just a nice little light touch. It makes sense to me. I'm pretty willing to bet that's why they did it, and that's actually the reason for it. Which is kind of cool. So it's the same camo pattern, but they already kind of tailor the color palettes to how you would utilize that particular piece of gear, which is super cool. So basically, for like spring turkey, early bow season, when it's really hot, ranging from that 60 degrees to 80 degrees or 60 to 75 degrees, those are the two pieces I would mainly wear. Is that arrow wool kind of stuff, and I would basically throw in my pack either the Chama hoodie, or to make it really easy for me to put things on, take things off, is the Sawtooth Hybrid jacket, which is right here. And this is something I've also kind of brought up a little bit towards like the third towards the end of October. I started to wear this as like basically when I walk out, I would wear this and I would retain heat really well. The one thing I will note about the Sawtooth, just in terms of the construction, there's a lot of more insulation on the front part of the jacket, shoulders, chest, down your shoulders, on the upper part of your arms, but on the back it's very light, very breathable. The reason behind that is if you're wearing a pack, it allows a lot of that heat that you might get, like where you just want to have that layer that's going to, when you sit down, you're going to be warm, but it doesn't, you aren't going to overheat while wearing kind of like a more of like an insulation layer. They actually have the lighter in the back, so that way your back can breathe when you have a pack on your back, which can be a pro and a con. It's pro when you're doing a more active kind of hunt, so like spot and stalk, still hunting, that kind of thing. If you're hunting like hills and stuff like that, you're going to move a lot. That piece is really good for that. But in terms of that tree stand hunt, wouldn't really use it past once it starts to dip in like the 40s. Yeah, the like upper 40s, mid 40s, down into the 30s. I wouldn't wear this jacket as that your primary insulation piece. Definitely in the 50s, you can get away with that, as long as you layer underneath that properly. When you can do that properly with the air wool pieces as well. It also comes with a hood that also has the same kind of effect as the Wick hoodie hood, where you just add that hood to it over your head and retains just that little bit more heat, puts you right in that sweet spot. So once we get into, like, leaves are starting to fall about that third, fourth week, and the temperatures start to hover on that 50s, maybe 40s-ish, what I'll do is probably just to conserve a little bit on the hood. I wouldn't go with the Wick hoodie at that point. I'll still stick with the Arrow Wool crew neck base layer, but I would wear the Halstead Fleece, which is like their midweight line fleece, which is, it doesn't add bulk, but it adds a little more warmth to your system. And the collar is really nice. You can zip it up and you can actually control a little bit of your ventilation and heat retention with where that zipper is aligned. So I'll wear Airwool, Halstead, and Sawtooth. And I'll bring that in, and then if I need to, if we start to get more towards on the colder side, there's a little more wind, the Woodbury will come in, especially if I'm doing more stationary type stuff. If it's more active, the more active your hunt, Sawtooth or like a Catalyst soft shell at top would be more your speed. So now let's talk about when we get into those colder temps where it starts to dip more, like 50s, kind of like the high during like noon. Then it drips and it hovers more in the 40s to 30s. That's when I would probably go with a little more heavier base layer. I would probably do the Furnace series, which is about a 200 weight base layer. I'd switch to that with the Halstead and Woodbury. Woodbury, I would, if I'm doing a spot and stalk kind of thing, the Woodbury I would just keep in my pack. I would stick with that 200 Furnace base layer with the Halstead. And another thing, if you don't like the Halstead or can't find the Halstead, another, or like the equivalent of that, would be their Klamath series. That is basically the same kind of waffle top-ish kind of insulation layer on the inside, but the Klamath hoodie adds that hood, and that's also a very good option for you to use as well from an insulation standpoint, right within that third to fourth week, maybe beginning of November, where the temperatures are going to fluctuate from the high of 50 degrees to a low of 40, maybe dipping into the 30s just a bit more at night. I would look into the Klamath series that are out on First Lite now. That was released 2018. Then combine that with the Woodbury for doing more of a tree stand kind of sit. That would put you right in the sweet spot. You'll be comfortable the whole set. That's the at least what I found is like kind of the perfect like amount of insulation during that particular time period. And then once you get past that into gun season and stuff like that, it's more so you kind of fudge a little bit. Because I typically tend to, once gun season kind of comes in, I tend to want to try and do a little bit more of being on the foot, spot and stalk kind of stuff, more moving around, because that's just the way Corey and I usually actually have gone and hunt. So when like this past winter, when we were doing our opening day gun season, I wore the Halstead Woodbury and then like a lighter air wool, so I had breathability, insulation, and then just basically just sealing the deal, making sure I was nice and warm. But it's just making sure I'm just now going to monitor the ventilation, so I'm breathing, I'm not going to sweat, so that way when I do stand still, I'm not going to freeze. And that's going to be the kind of the thing we're going to have to tinker around with. Or not really tinker around, but just be more mindful of. And that goes with any kind of technical clothing or layering that you're going to do. So those are kind of like my go-to for tops, especially once we get into that snow on the ground. It's really cold, especially if you're in a tree stand. You're gonna sweat and be a little bit warm on the walk out, depending on how far the walk out. But of course, you can take your Woodbury or a heavier jacket, put it in your pack. Once you get to the stand, you're set up in the stand, then you can put that on, and then you're good to go. And that's pretty much my cocktail for that. If you're going to do more of a tree stand, instead of wearing the air wool, I would go with that 200 furnace base layer or the kiln. Those are the two systems. It's more of like a heavier base layer. It's basically the only thing I would change with, and that's system if you're going to sit in a tree stand when there's snow on the ground, more so towards like November, late November, going into December. Basically, once you hit about that 30-degree mark and past, and it gets colder. Now, went over my tops. Now the bottom, the pants that I would pair these with, because I actually had a couple questions about like what type of pant you use for early season, late season, that kind of stuff, and thankfully I've been able to test out two of their sets of pants. The Obsidian Reno pants, which are right here. I have one in like they're Dark Earth and Fusion. Fusion, I plan on using this for turkey or tree stand hunting early season when there's a little more foliage around. The cool thing about the Obsidian plants is a large percentage of this pant is made with merino wool. So what that does is has great regulation of body temp, and it's quiet. Especially when you're up in a tree stand or walking, it's super quiet. I remember one of the first times like I actually got like the pants, I just walked around in the woods and kind of hit like a soft kind of like a pine stand, and there's just needles on the ground, no leaves at all, walking, and I could like barely hear myself walking. I was like, this is cool. But the thing with the Obsidian merino pants, you can wear those depending on how you layer underneath. Early season, I would wear just like a long, like a short length boxer brief, something like that, compression short, underneath these for that early season. And then as it gets towards like that 40, 50, and depending on what you're doing, if you're going to sit or walk, if you walk, I'd stick more air on the side of less would be more, so that way you're not going to sweat in between, get like the reverse of like swamp ass or crotch monkey, whatever you want to call it, basically the chafing swamp and just sweaty around your nether areas. That would be my approach. As once we approach like about that 3rd, 4th week of October and early November, when the temperatures start to go from like that 50, 40 around there, that's when I would try and layer in something like this, which is like a 3/4 inch or 3/4 length long bottom. I think these are about 150, 200 weight, and the reason why I had the 3/4 inch cut is not that they're full on long johns. It's just enough where they kind of come down, cover my knees, go down halfway down my calf, and kind of allows me a little more breathability. My ankles aren't going to be too constrained, and then pair them with socks. These are like their more technical socks. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It's not the cold weather socks, but it's the ones that have strategic padding around ankles, heels, toes. So that way you're going to reduce a little bit of the wear and tear on the sock and your feet when you're actually hiking around. And when you pair the 3/4 length long, bottom with a higher sock, you actually can cover up that exposed skin. Therefore, you're kind of creating a long john out of that without overdoing it, without doubling up on that layer once you get down towards the ankles and your calf. It's very low profile, but maximizing your heat and regulation of temperature. So the Obsidians I would use early season, spring, turkey season, all the way up until basically you start hitting about that 40-degree, 30-degree range, and that's when I would have to switch, just because of some couple other things within another pant series that they have that has this more efficient advantages to it. Within the cocktail that I talked about, early season, just a boxer brief, compression short kind of thing with these socks. Then as you approach about that 3rd, 4th week, when the temperatures start moving towards that 50, 40-degree mark, that is when I would add the 3/4 length long john bottom to layer underneath the Obsidian Merino pants with the socks. Now, the other pant system I was able to use and I really dig, especially when you do the same kind of layering concept with the Obsidian Merinos. With this particular pant, late season, it's more like December, late November, when your temperatures are more in either in the teens or 20s, or more so like that maybe early November where you're doing a lot of long sits and there's some high wind and it's just kind of the cold just tends to bite just a little bit more, is the Catalyst soft shell pant, which has a outside, which is like the 37.5 Corona technology, which talks about bringing that breathability. The one thing that sets these pants, the soft shell pants, besides the soft shell from the Merino the Obsidian pants, is that they are fleece lined. So you have built into the pant a little bit of like an insulation layer to it, which means you don't have to do quite as much, but it definitely just adds that extra little bit, along with the soft shell, which kind of cuts wind out just a little bit more than the Obsidian Merino pants, especially when we get towards like November and the temperatures start to really drop. That's when I would switch over to the Catalyst soft shell pant. And then do the same kind of layering cocktail. The colder it gets, and especially during this time period, if you're going to sit in a tree stand, I wouldn't even bother trying to do just like the boxer brief. I go straight to the 3/4 length bottoms and socks combo, maybe a cold wet other sock when you're sitting up in a stand for those longer hunts. That's my tip. So that's kind of covering tops and bottoms and the thought process and how I've used them throughout my hunting season. I've used this actually entire system, all these clothes, to hunt turkey season, waterfowl, and deer. All of deer season, from early October to snow. I've used this entire arsenal, if you will. This is all that I own, and actually stayed comfortable throughout all that. Pleasantly comfortable, probably the most comfortable I've ever been in wearing any kind of clothing system or layering system out there. At least, well, not out there, but that I've used. I found this video a little helpful for you in kind of sorting through and wading through the confusionness and madness that is that technical clothing. If you don't want to use First Lite, the same kind of process and looking at the weight and the types and kind of the systems and doing your research about if you want to use like a Sika brand or QE. The same concepts apply. They're all technical pieces of gear, and you can create layering systems based off that, and you have to use them properly. But the same kind of things apply. Sika has very similar pieces of gear and clothing that First Lite does. I just happen to think First Lite's fusion pattern is more efficient from a cost standpoint. They're not cheap, but I can use this to hunt turkey, waterfowl, squirrels, deer, yotes, bear, blah, in a variety of times of year, conditions, so on and so forth. So that's why I picked First Lite. But again, the same thought process and kind of what I ran you through, you can still apply that to any other brand within this tier, or even just in general if you want to use cheaper stuff. It's the same kind of thought process. Just be mindful about weights, breathability, and all those kinds of things, and like maintaining your heat versus layering up, and really taking into consideration what type of hunting you are doing as well. So again, this is Ian. Before you go, check in the link below. We have a link to our Teespring store where you guys can pick up a 5x5 Outdoors t-shirt, hoodie. At least that's what we have right now, in a variety of colors ranging from the royal blue you see myself or any of the guys wear to black, green, you name it. So if you would like to rep your 5x5 pride, please check the link below in this video, in the description below. Again, and also, we're also on Instagram at 5x5 Outdoors. We also have a podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Itcher, you name it, Spotify. So please be sure to check that out. We're hoping to be able to kind of put out a little bit more content on that as soon as we kind of approach more into the summertime and we have a little more things to talk about. So this is Ian. Thank you for watching.